Does it hurt? Miles Ketter asked, smiling as he twisted the diamond bracelet on the girl's wrist until the metal bit skin and a thin line of blood showed. The girl didn't cry. She leaned toward Harper, the waitress pressing a napkin to the cut, and whispered, "Don't panic. My dad's already here." Harper's stomach dropped, because the men at that table weren't loud drunks. They were senators, CEOs, and investors who could erase people quietly. And Ketter was the kind of rich that liked to prove it. Harper kept her face blank, the way you learn to do when rent is due and your brother's medicine depends on tips. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'll get antiseptic." "No," the girl said, calm as glass. "Just stay close." She couldn't have been older than 19. Simple navy dress. No entourage. No visible security. Her eyes flicked past Harper's shoulder toward the mirrored wall behind the bar, toward the reflections you only notice if you've worked here long enough. Harper followed the glance without turning her head. In the mirror, a tall man in a charcoal suit stood in the shadow of the private corridor, hands folded, not eating, not talking, watching. Ketter let go of the girl's wrist and lifted his glass like he'd done something funny. "Look at that," he announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She's tougher than she looks." Laughter rippled, polite, expensive, relieved it wasn't aimed at them. Harper hated that sound more than yelling. Ketter leaned in again, voice soft and sharp. "What's your name?" "Avery," the girl said. "Avery," he repeated, savoring it. "You're here alone? Brave? Or stupid?" His gaze slid to Harper like she was furniture. "Another round," he said, snapping his fingers. "And tell the kitchen I want dessert early. We're celebrating." Harper nodded and moved. Tray steady, pulse not. At the service station, her manager Conrad appeared beside her, already sweating through his collar. "Whatever they want, give it," he whispered. "That's Miles Ketter." "He cut her," Harper said. Conrad's smile stayed glued on. "Then don't let her bleed on my linens." Harper stared at him, then at the clean stacks of napkins, and felt something in her chest go cold and hard. She went back with the drinks just as Ketter stood, as if the whole restaurant belonged to his voice. "Quick game," he said. "One question for our guest. If I like her answer, I match the biggest donation in the room. If I don't, she apologizes for wasting our time." People shifted in their seats. No one stopped him. The jazz trio kept playing, quieter now, like they were afraid of the wrong note. Avery didn't flinch. "Ask," she said. Ketter's smile sharpened. "Tell us what you want most in the world." Harper set the glasses down, eyes on Avery's bleeding wrist, then on Ketter's hands. Avery looked straight at him. "I want you to say it out loud," she said. The room tightened. "Say what?" Ketter asked, still smiling. "Why you did it," Avery replied. "Why you need to hurt someone where everyone can see." Ketter's smile finally cracked. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist again, right over the fresh cut, squeezing until Avery's knuckles whitened. Harper moved without thinking, half a step forward, then stopped. "Whatever happens next, don't step between him and me. Just watch his hands." Avery's whisper from seconds ago rang in Harper's head. Avery's eyes met Harper's for a brief second, and she gave the smallest nod, like permission. Harper's thumb slid inside her apron pocket and tapped her phone screen once, then again, feeling the tiny vibration that meant it was recording. In the mirrored wall, the man in the charcoal suit touched an earpiece and didn't look away. Conrad leaned in, breath sour with panic. "Open the private room," he hissed at Harper. "Ketter wants them moved. Now." Harper looked at Avery's blood soaking the napkin, heard the soft click of the corridor door unlatching, and realized the entire restaurant had become a stage, and the audience had already chosen silence. Conrad opened the private room with a keycard like he was unlocking a vault and not walking a bleeding girl into a trap. The velvet curtain swallowed the noise of the main floor the moment they stepped through, and the air changed. Thicker, warmer, insulated. A long table, dim sconces, a single camera dome tucked into the corner that looked decorative if you didn't know what to look for. Miles Ketter, kept his hand clamped around Avery's wrist the whole way, guiding her like a prize he'd won. "Careful," he said, voice smooth. "You're dripping." Avery didn't look down. "It's fine," she said, and then to Harper, barely moving her lips, "Don't let him see your hands shaking. He likes that." Harper hated that her hands obeyed, steadying the tray like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had. Ketta's men filed in behind them. 2 donors Harper recognized from magazine covers, and one lawyer-looking man with a grin that never touched his eyes. The door shut. The jazz outside became a distant rumor. Ketta released Avery's wrist only to pick up a clean napkin and press it to the cut with a little too much force. "Does it hurt?" he asked again, almost tender. Avery's mouth twitched, not from pain, but from impatience. "A little," she said. "You seem disappointed." The lawyer chuckled. "She's got a mouth." "She's got a lesson coming," Ketta replied, and his gaze slid to Harper. "You, bring ice. And tell your manager if anyone comes near this door, the donations vanish." Conrad nodded too fast. "Of course, Mr. Ketta." Harper turned, but Avery's voice stopped her. "Stay," Avery said, calm, like she was ordering water. Ketta lifted a brow. "She doesn't get a vote." Avery looked at him. "Then make her leave," she said, "and explain why you need witnesses gone." The men at the table shifted. That word, witnesses, landed wrong. Ketta's smile tightened, but he waved a hand like he was generous. "Fine, stay. I want her to see how this works." Harper set the tray down and stayed by the wall, phone hidden in her apron pocket, recording. She could feel the heat of it against her thigh, every second another thread tightening around the room. Ketta took his seat at the head of the table like a king returning to his throne. "Avery," he said, rolling the name again, "you came into my event and tried to embarrass me. That's brave." "It's not your event," Avery replied. "You just like acting like it is." One of the donors gave a nervous laugh and immediately regretted it. Ketta leaned forward. "Let's make this simple. You apologize. You tell everyone you overreacted. You tell them I'm a good man. And then I match the biggest donation in the room, like I said. That hospital wing gets built. Everyone wins. And you get to keep doing this," Avery said, nodding at her wrist, "to whoever can't afford to say no." Ketta's eyes flashed. "You don't know anything about no." He glanced to the lawyer. "Tell her." The lawyer spread his hands. "You're in a private clubroom with a man who funds half the boards in this city. If you want to play martyr, play it somewhere else. Tonight is about money moving, permits, contracts, influence." He said the last word like it tasted good. Avery's gaze flicked to Harper, then back to Ketta. "Influence," she repeated, slow. "Like calling the inspector on a Friday morning?" The donor on Ketta's left stiffened so sharply his chair creaked. Ketta's eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" Avery shrugged with one shoulder. "I heard you outside. You talk like the walls are bought." Ketta stared at her, calculating. Then he smiled again, softer. "Okay," he said, voice dropping into something almost intimate. "So you're not stupid. Good. Then you understand this is how the world works. People like you want to feel clean. People like me do what's necessary." He reached into his pocket and set a black card on the table, then pushed it toward Avery. "Name a number, donate it. Keep the wing. Make a speech about forgiveness. I'll even let your little injury be part of the story. It'll look heroic." Avery didn't touch the card. "And if I don't?" Ketta's eyes slid to Harper again, like he couldn't help himself. "Then your waitress friend gets fired tonight. Your manager loses his job tomorrow. The hospital wing still gets built, but my name goes on it instead of yours. And you learn a lesson." He leaned in, voice sweet. "Does that hurt?" Avery exhaled, slow, like she was steadying herself, and Harper thought for a second she was about to break. Then Avery turned her wrist, letting the napkin fall so the cut was visible, bright against her skin. "You like pain because it makes you feel safe," she said. "Because As long as someone else is hurting, you don't have to wonder when it's your turn. Ketta's smile froze. You're talking too much, he snapped. Avery's eyes didn't move. Keep talking, she said. Tell them what you just told me. Say out loud that you'll ruin their lives if I don't cover for you. Ketta laughed, harsh. You think I'm going to incriminate myself for a girl with a bleeding wrist? I think you can't stop, Avery replied. You already started. In the mirror at the far end of the room, Harper saw the man in the charcoal suit step closer to the corridor door, just enough to be seen if you knew to look. He didn't enter. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, like he was waiting for the exact moment a line got crossed on record. Avery's voice stayed calm as ever. Don't panic, she said, and this time she said it louder for everyone. My dad's already here. Ketta's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her with a sharp, mocking grin. Your dad? He said. Who's your dad? Avery held his gaze, unblinking. The man you've been trying to impress all night, she said, without realizing you've been failing. Ketta's grin faltered, just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, the room finally understood there was someone bigger in the shadows, and Ketta might have just bled first. In rooms built for the rich, there's an unwritten rule. The first person to look at the door is the first person who's afraid. Miles Ketta looked at the door again. The man I've been trying to impress? He repeated, louder now, performing confusion for his audience. Avery didn't blink. She lifted her injured wrist so the blood shone under the sconce light. Then keep talking, she said. Say what you promised to do to her if I don't play along. Ketta's gaze darted to Harper. She's staff, he snapped. She's irrelevant. The corridor door clicked, soft and precise, and the man in the charcoal suit stepped into the private room. Silver at his temples. Eyes that didn't wander. He looked at Avery's wrist first, then at Ketta's hand. Take your hand off my daughter, he said. Not loud. Final. Ketta's mouth opened, then closed. The lawyer at his side half stood, colour draining. Mr. Rowland. Miles, the man said, like the name tasted bitter. You asked me for 10 minutes tonight. This is how you start? Ketta swallowed and forced a smile. This is a misunderstanding. We were joking. Rowland didn't look at him. Does it hurt? He asked Avery. A little, she said. Good, Rowland replied, calm with an edge. Then he turned to Harper. Your name? Harper's throat tightened. Harper. Rowland nodded once. Did he threaten you? Ketta's stare burned into her, daring her to lie. Conrad, the manager, hovered at the doorway like a man waiting for the floor to tell him which way to fall. Avery's voice slipped in, steady. Tell the truth. Harper exhaled. Yes, she said. He said he'd ruin me. He told me to keep people away from the door. Ketta laughed too high. Come on, I'm funding the hospital wing. You're pledging, Rowland corrected, finally meeting his eyes. There's a difference. He set a small black recorder on the linen. Its light blinked once, like a heartbeat. The room's been protected since you grabbed her wrist, Rowland said. And it will stay protected. Ketta's face hardened. You set this up. No, Rowland replied. You did, when you decided pain was entertainment. Behind him, two men appeared in the doorway. Not staff, not guests, standing in the exact spots that made leaving feel expensive. Rowland nodded toward Conrad. Medic, now. Conrad moved, grateful to have an order that wasn't a choice. Avery glanced at Harper and murmured without moving her lips. Keep recording. Whatever he says next matters more than what he did. Avery looked around the table, voice still calm. My dad is the chairman of the foundation, she said. He's also the reason this room has upgraded security. Because people get hurt in places like this, and everyone pretends they didn't see it. One donor's hand shook as he reached for his water. Ketta tried to pull the knight back under him. Graham, listen. I can still match the donations. I can still make this right. I don't want your money, Rowland said. I want your words. Ketta's smile curdled. You want words? Fine, he snapped, Your daughter came in here to bait me. She thinks she can blow up a board vote because I bruised her wrist? I've already handled the vote. I handled the inspector. I handled the permit. That's what I pay people for." The lawyer's face tightened in horror. Roland didn't react, didn't celebrate, didn't even blink. He just tilted his head slightly. "Say that again," he said. Keta scoffed. "Don't play games." "I'm not," Roland replied. "I'm giving you a chance to choose your next sentence carefully." Keta looked at Avery's wrist, at Harper's fixed expression, at the men in the doorway, and his voice rose anyway because pride always spoke before survival. "I paid to make it happen," he said. "I paid to make sure nobody stood in my way." Roland's gaze shifted to the recorder's blinking light, then back to Keta. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's the part I needed." Roland didn't move like a man enjoying victory. He moved like a man closing a file. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder, set it beside the blinking recorder, then looked around the table at the donors who suddenly remembered they had careers. "Everyone stays seated," he said, still not raising his voice. "Nobody deletes anything. Nobody calls anyone. You're all witnesses now." The lawyer's hands lifted halfway, instinctive, as if he could talk his way out of physics. "Mr. Roland, let's be reasonable." Reasonable was an option before he put his hands on her, Roland replied, eyes never leaving Keta. Keta's face had turned into something sharp and ugly, like he'd been forced to see himself in clean light. "This is insane," he snapped. "You can't record a private conversation." Roland nodded once. "Then you shouldn't have chosen a room with a monitoring notice and a manager you threatened into opening it." Conrad flinched, as if his name had been called in church. Harper's phone vibrated softly in her pocket again, the recording still running, and she kept her body still because she could feel Keta watching her hands. Avery sat with her injured wrist on the linen, napkins soaked through, eyes clear. "Keep talking," she said to Keta, calm as ever. "Tell my dad who you paid." "Say the names." Keta scoffed, but his gaze flicked to the door. "I'm leaving," he said, pushing his chair back. One of the men in the doorway shifted a half step, not a block, a reminder. Keta froze. The donor on his left cleared his throat, voice tight. "Miles, maybe you should listen to—" "Shut up," Keta hissed, and the room heard the crack in him. Roland turned his head slightly toward the donor. "If anyone here is worried about exposure," he said, "you should be. You were comfortable until the moment the bill arrived." The donor swallowed hard and stared at his hands. Keta tried another angle, softer, as if he could charm his way back into control. "Graham, you know how this works," he said. "The wing gets built. People get helped. You want to burn that down because your daughter got a scratch?" Avery's mouth tightened. "It's not a scratch," she said. "It's proof you need to hurt someone to feel big." Keta's eyes flashed. "You don't know what I've done for this city." Roland's gaze stayed steady. "Say it again," he said, tapping the recorder lightly, not even looking down. "Tell us what you did for the city." The lawyer's voice cut in fast. "Miles, stop talking." Keta snapped his head at him. "Don't tell me what to do," he barked, and then he turned back to Roland like rage could substitute for strategy. "Fine," he said. "I did what everyone does. I greased the wheels. I got the permit pushed through. I made sure the inspector signed on Friday because Monday would have been messy. I paid the consultant to keep the neighborhood group quiet. I promised the councilman's office a seat at the gala next year. You want to pretend you're clean, Graham? You're standing in the same dirt. You just call it philanthropy." The silence after that was different. Not shock. Calculation. Because now everyone at the table knew there was a line on the tape that could ruin them too. Roland didn't react emotionally. He simply looked to the doorway and nodded once. The man closest to the door lifted a small device, and the lock clicked again, louder this time. A red indicator on the inside panel lit up. "Security protocol," Roland said, almost to the room. "This door opens when I say it opens." Keta's breathing changed, shallow and quick, like he'd finally felt the walls. You can't hold me, he said. I can, Roland replied, for assault and witness intimidation until law enforcement arrives. You threatened staff. You coerced access. You put your hands on my daughter. And you just described a bribery chain in front of 3 men who will spend the next hour deciding whether to save themselves by telling the truth. One donor's face went grey. Another reached for his glass and missed it, fingers trembling. Conrad returned with a small first aid kit, hands shaking as he knelt by Avery. I'm sorry, he whispered, not sure who he meant it for. Avery didn't look at him. She looked at Harper. You okay? She asked, like Harper was the one bleeding. Harper's throat tightened. I think so, she managed. Roland's gaze flicked to Harper for the first time, like she was a person, not staff. Harper, he said, and the fact he remembered her name made her eyes sting. You will not be fired for this. If anyone here tries to retaliate, they answer to me. Keta barked a laugh that sounded like it hurt. You're going to protect a waitress from me? Roland's voice stayed calm. I'm going to protect the next one too. Keta's eyes went wild for a second, searching, hunting for any crack. This is a stunt, he said, louder, as if volume could rewrite. You set me up because you needed a villain for your daughter's little power trip. Avery's wrist was being cleaned now, antiseptic biting, and she didn't flinch. You weren't picked, she said softly. You volunteered. Then the hallway outside filled with a new sound, muted but unmistakable. Coordinated footsteps, radios, the low murmur of people who didn't care who Miles Keta was. The men in the doorway straightened, and Conrad's eyes darted toward the lock panel like he expected it to explode. Roland looked at Keta with something almost like pity. You could have walked away the first time she asked if it hurt, he said. You chose to squeeze. Keta's jaw clenched, and he swallowed hard. Graham, he said again, last attempt, voice dropping. We can fix this. Name your price. Roland shook his head once. You already paid it, he replied. And the door behind him opened from the outside on Roland's signal, letting in a woman in a dark suit with a badge clipped to her belt and eyes that went straight to Avery's wrist, then to Keta's face, then to the recorder blinking on the table like it had been waiting for her. The woman with the badge stepped into the private room like she owned the air. Detective Lena Ortiz, homicide and major crimes. But tonight her eyes weren't looking for a body. They were looking for the moment a powerful man realized the rules still applied. She nodded once at Roland, then at Avery's wrist. Then she locked onto Miles Keta. Mr. Keta, she said, voice flat, stand up, hands where I can see them. Keta let out a laugh that sounded like it scraped his throat. This is a charity dinner, he snapped, spreading his palms like innocence was a gesture. You can't drag me out because a spoiled kid got dramatic. Avery lifted her injured wrist, blood seeping through fresh gauze now, and asked softly, Does it hurt, Miles? The question hit him harder than any command, because it wasn't pleading. It was a mirror. Ortiz stepped closer to the table and tapped the blinking recorder. We've got assault. We've got witness intimidation. We've got a protected room recording of you describing payments tied to a city permit, she said. And we have multiple witnesses in this room who just heard you say it twice. The lawyer's face tightened like he was swallowing glass. One donor cleared his throat and tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. Keta's gaze flicked around the table, frantic now, looking for the usual escape hatch. Someone to smooth it over, someone to buy time, someone to make the problem disappear. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. Rich men were brave until the badge showed up. Roland didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He just looked at Keta with tired certainty. You wanted 10 minutes, he said. You got them. You spent them hurting my daughter and threatening a waitress. Keta's jaw clenched. I didn't threaten. You did, Harper said, surprising herself with how steady it came out. Her phone was still recording in her pocket, warm against her leg, and she realized her hands weren't shaking anymore. Keta turned on her like she'd stepped out of line. You, he hissed. You're nobody. Harper met his eyes. I'm the person you thought wouldn't matter, she said, and it tasted like freedom. Ortiz held up a hand, cutting the room cleanly. "Mr. Ketter, stand. Now." Ketter pushed back his chair and rose, shoulders stiff, trying to keep the shape of control. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, louder, for the table, for the walls, for any invisible power he hoped still listened to him. "Graham, tell her. Tell her this is politics." Roland didn't even glance at Ortiz. "Do your job," he said. Ortiz nodded, stepped in, and when Ketter tried to turn away, she caught his wrist. Not squeezing, not twisting, just enough pressure to stop him. Ketter flinched anyway, and Avery's voice cut through the moment, calm as a blade. "Does it hurt?" she asked again. Ketter's face flushed a violent red. "Don't!" he snapped at her, and the word came out like a plea, like he couldn't stand the symmetry of it. Ortiz guided his hands behind his back, and the cuffs clicked shut, loud in the velvet room. That sound did something to the donors. One of them exhaled a shaky breath. Another leaned forward, palms on the table, eyes wide like he'd just woken up inside a nightmare he'd helped build. The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it, then finally spoke with the tone of a man choosing survival. "Detective, if I cooperate, I want it noted I advised him to stop talking." Ortiz's eyes didn't soften. "You can talk to the DA," she said. "Right now, I'm collecting devices." One of the plainclothes men at the door stepped in, offering evidence bags with quiet efficiency. Phones appeared like guilty confessions sliding onto the linen. Ketter looked at them like betrayal was physical. "You're going to turn on me?" he barked. The donor with the grey suit didn't look up. "You turned on all of us the second you grabbed her," he muttered. And that was the moment Ketter understood he'd become the thing everyone would sacrifice. Roland walked to Avery and gently took her uninjured hand. "You did good," he said. Avery's eyes stayed on Ketter as Ortiz moved him toward the door. "I told you not to panic," she murmured, and then, quieter so only Harper could hear, "He needed to say it out loud. They always do." Harper swallowed, throat tight. "Why? Why me?" she whispered. Avery finally looked at her, expression steady, almost kind. "Because he would have done it to you," she said. "And because if nobody protects the people he calls nobody, nothing changes." Ortiz opened the door, and the noise of the restaurant rushed back in. Forks, low laughter, a glass clinking, then died as heads turned. Miles Ketter was walked through the main dining room in cuffs, his face tight with rage and humiliation, and for once, the room didn't make space for him like he was royalty. People simply watched. Some pretended not to. Some couldn't help themselves. Outside, the cold night swallowed him, flashing lights reflecting off wet pavement, and his voice rose one last time, sharp and cracking. "Graham, you think this ends me?" Rowland didn't follow him out. He didn't need to. He just stood with his daughter, and the waitress Ketter tried to erase, and he watched the door close like a chapter. Inside the private room, Ortiz turned back to the table of donors. "If you're smart," she said, "you'll start telling the truth before your lawyers tell you it's too late." Avery's wrist was wrapped now. The bleeding stopped, but the sting stayed, and she glanced at Harper like a reminder. "It's going to hurt for him," she said softly. "That's the point." Harper let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years, and when Conrad approached like a man trying to rebuild a spine, Roland spoke before he could. "She keeps her job," he said, "and if anyone in this building retaliates against her, they'll answer to me and to the Foundation." Conrad nodded hard, eyes shining, and Harper realized she wasn't invisible anymore. Avery squeezed her hand once, quick and grounding. "Go home after this," she said, "and tomorrow, if you want, I'll help you find a place where the door locks from the inside." Harper nodded, unable to find words. In the corridor mirror, for the first time all night, she saw herself clearly. Not a prop, not a target, just a person who'd survived the moment the powerful man finally met a wall. If you want more stories where the cruelest person in the room gets silenced at the worst possible time, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what kind of billionaire you want to see fall next.